Howdy, I'm Matt, and in this episode we are going to be discussing soldering irons. Now, this is one thing which I seem to get continually rip the piss out of me because I use an £8.99, so about a $10 soldering iron, and I frankly do not feel, oh, by the way, with the cheapest tips possible as well, and I personally don't feel that it's worth the expense of buying an expensive soldering iron like a TS100 or whatever it is people keep buying. Now, this is, of course, my opinion, and from my own experience, I do have some slight experience with electronics previously. Some of you may not know I have a HND in Electrical and Electronic Communications Engineering, which I know is a bit of a gob for, but for at least 4 years we were dicking around with electronics every single day. And I've built so many different projects which do different things. And the thing is the one thing which I've learned: the only time you need an expensive temperature-controlled soldering iron is that when you really need to crank it up. And I genuinely mean you need to crank it up because you're going to be soldering something big or something which dissipates heat very quickly, such as a large heatsink, for example. That is definitely tricky, but you can get past those kind of things with a cheaper one by using a blowtorch in those very, very rare instances. But in reality, to get soldering, you don't need a really expensive soldering iron. And I've also made a point here is that I have not cleaned up my workbench. Okay, this is what my soldering station looks like, and it's not pretty, but it works. So I'm going to give you a quick run round. First things first, I've got a bit of paper on there, which is actually the Revenge manual for the Revenge FPV flying wing. And by the way, this is not going to be a guide on how to solder. I'm assuming that you can solder. I'm just going to have a quick look at the soldering station and the soldering iron which I'm using. And I've got a battery which I've completely destroyed, which I need to work on here as well. And while I think of it, I am just going to pop that cover on. So my workstation, it's the parts which I need. I've got some solderer loitering around here. I've got a flux pen. Probably that's my biggest tip for you to take away, is buy one of these flux pens. You can buy them for about $2.99 off eBay or cheaper. And they just make things go so much easier. So you just give them a quick shake, and crucially is that you push down the nib onto the surface which you're going to be soldering, and the flux pen just helps the solder flow. Okay, I'm not using expensive solder. In fact, I'm using probably the cheapest possible, which is Silverline 100 gram solder. It says AS15, just bought off eBay. Again, it would have been one of the cheapest solders going. I do have just a few specialized tools. I do have a vacuum pump for desoldering. Those things do come in really useful, although for the average RC pilot, that's just a waste of money. They're only £1 or £2. Now we need to get on to the soldering iron itself. Oh, I do have a helping hands here as well. These things are absolutely invaluable. You will see that mine's had a lot of abuse. The magnifying glass is completely useless, and judging by the amount of abuse that clip has had, you can see how much soldering I've done over the last couple of years. So helping hands are very useful, although the majority of the time I'm just freehanding stuff. Also, one part before we get to the soldering iron is that a little soldering tray like this with a metal scouring pad inside. By the way, you don't need this metal cover. You could, if you're on an absolute budget, just use a metal scouring pad. Cost like 50p from a pound shop, pound from a pound shop, if that makes sense. One tip for you: there's quite a lot of gravity in this one. There is a ton of lead in here, because what was happening, I was jabbing it with the soldering iron. I really do mean jabbing it with the soldering iron, and to clean the nib off. And the thing is, it was going all over the desk. Now I can stick it over there, get the soldering iron, which is just over here, and then just jab it in the end, and we've got a nice clean nib. Okay, now it does go off green. It's not the prettiest nib in the world. This is the cheapest soldering iron which I could get my hands on, which was from Screwfix for £8.99. The supplied tip was absolutely rubbish. I'm just going to put that back over on its stand, and it gets hot. It melts solder. That's all I care about. That's all you really need to care about. One tip for you is that you do need to get some tips. These are some silverline ones, again the cheapest possible from Amazon. part number 675071. I'll put links to them in the video description. And I'm just using the thinnest tip which we've got. And they've been absolutely brilliant. In fact, I've had that soldering iron for about a year now. The one which I had before, I had for about a year now. That one's actually due to break. They do seem to only last me a year. Number one, because of the amount of soldering which I do. And number two, I do tend to forget that it's on. And it has been known for the soldering iron to be here on for days. Now, that has kind of concerned me. And I'm just going to lean over the screen at the moment and grab my device to combat that, which is... grab this plug here. I bought these. They are AES1. I'll put a link to them off Amazon. And these are just timer plugs. And what you do, you plug in the device which you want to put on a timer. You then plug this in the wall. Of course, this is a UK plug. Apologies if you're in the States or maybe Europe. Do check your local Amazon to see what you can get what's available to you. And very, very simply, you'll see that on the top there's some timers, and you just press the button once and it'll move to 15 minutes. And that's normally what I use for the soldering iron. If I'm going to be using it for a while, I'll go to 30 minutes. And of course, then you can then do 1, 2, 4, and 8 hours. Okay, and the little LED just moves across. So you want to turn it off, you just press it round and all the LEDs go out. Absolutely matte proof, and that's put me a lot more confident with the soldering iron. I should have had one of these a very, very long time ago, and I've got two of them. I've got one here not only for the soldering iron, but I've also got one for the battery charger as well. So I'm going to plug that back in the wall. All I'm going to do is just press the button on the top. The little green light's going to come on, and then I know that after 15 minutes it just goes click and turns itself off. Happy days. Ace. So that's turned back on again. And now let's get into soldering. Now, like I said, my biggest tip for you is just use the flux pen and make sure both parts which you're going to be soldering have perhaps been pre-soldered. Now, like I said, this isn't a tip video on how you should solder or anything like that. I just wanted to make the point is that there's definitely some tool envy going on out there. People will spend an absolute fortune on devices and say they're absolutely brilliant, when in reality is that you can get away with the cheapest item possible, which is very much what I do when it comes to a soldering iron. There are times when you should definitely not skimp on quality parts, like for example connectors or batteries in and batteries for high demand applications. That said, in general day-to-day requirements of the average RC enthusiast, is that you don't need temperature control, you don't need the best soldering iron ever, and I'm just losing my voice there, I do apologise. And even with this great big thick cable, is that it's penetrated, the solder's very, I'll just make the point there, that is bigger than what you would do normally. Okay, look at the size of that cable. Is there a gauge marking on there? That is a 10 AWG. Okay, 10 AWG. That's thicker than what most of you would come across on a daily basis for soldering. And that solder, the combination of a little bit of flux, the soldering iron, and maybe a tiny bit of experience. Again, I was just using that in the heat rise and just not forcing the situation with the solder to go on there. And I've now been and pre-soldered the XT60 connector. I'm going to go and get the helping hands over here in a moment. And then I'm just going to dap that in and just touch it on, and that should be a good enough connection. So I'm going to go off and do that now. I'm sure I have appalled some of the viewers. I apologize if I have OCD for tidying up, except for when it comes to my soldering bench. I'm not kidding you. This thing is an absolute poop hole. The only time I ever get concerned about my soldering bench is that I've got a motor on here. And it's just the soldering bench is a soldering bench. You have bits of wire floating around. You've got solder leaning across. You have flux pens. You have different types of flux pens in there. You have desoldering braids. I've got all my XT60 connectors kicking around here. My soldering bench is and always will be a complete mess. The only time I have any care here, and all I do is get a fresh bit of paper or a fresh board. I've got a bit of foam here, to be frankly honest, and then just put that, if that was a motor which I'm working on, just because I don't want the motor to pick up any metal parts. Of course, that would damage the motor. So that's the only time I'd bring something clean in here, and that's my soldering workstation. Like I said, some people are going to get mortified by the state of my soldering desk, and they're going to get mortified that I've paid £8.99 and I must struggle on using such terrible components, when in reality the cheapest soldering iron possible, again here locally, I'm sure you can get cheaper ones on eBay, has been absolutely fine. This is cost me £9, £8.99 from Screwfix. I drove up the road and that was back here within 10 minutes or so, and was absolutely brilliant. And I could, at the time, I could just get on and get in soldering. I never would pay more than £10 for a soldering iron, if you consider the one thing which is really important is semi-half decent solder, a flux pen, and a decent nib as well. The nib which came with that one died or burnt away within a couple of days. Straight onto Amazon, a couple of these, and that's the one which has been in there for at least a year. So there you go, that's my humble opinion on soldering irons. You do not, generally speaking, need to buy a posh one. There's just no need for it. In day-to-day RC hobbyists, okay, there's generally no need to have a temperature-controlled dial one, and it can go up to 1 billion degrees. You know what I'm talking about. Of course, I've already said that there are applications, maybe if you're working with heat sinks or materials which will dissipate heat extremely quickly, then temperature controlled is absolutely, there's no way around it, absolutely required. You can cheat, and I have cheated here a few times, using a blowtorch to really get that nib right up to full temperature, almost, well, to frankly glowing, to get things to almost weld themselves together. But my point is, soldering irons, you only need the cheap one. I think I've made my point. If you have any questions about my cheap Screwfix, $8.99, here again, I'll just put it here in the middle of the screen. Okay, again, with the cheapest stand possible, and I don't struggle when it comes to soldering. I'm not going to embarrass myself on here in a moment by putting that on there. It's only going to take me 2 minutes just to sort that battery lead out, and off we go. Like I said, this isn't a lesson on how to solder. This is more a chit chat about why cheap and cheerful does exist when it comes to soldering irons. So if you have any questions or comments about my setup, please just ask in the comments section underneath this video, and we will definitely not be having a TS100 or whatever it is. You know what we're talking about at this desk. That said, I don't want to put you off. If you do a lot of soldering and you've got some spare budget in your RC adventures and you feel that you would like a more expensive or plush soldering iron, fuck it, go and buy one. You know, it's your, this is my little workspace, this is my soldering station. Okay, and I'm inviting you into my little soldering station. However, it's not your soldering station. So if you feel that you want a more expensive, fuck it, go and buy yourself one. I genuinely mean that. It's better than doing other things in life. That's all I'm going to say. My voice went a bit croaky there. I do apologise. You know what I'm saying though, is that there's worse things you could be spending money on in life than a soldering iron. In fact, what makes you happy? Happy days. For me, $8.99, a couple of nibs, cheapest solder, cheapest nibs, cheapest soldering iron, and it works great for me, at least. So, from myself, Matt, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. And I know that some of you are really going to be freaking out by the state of my desk and my views on soldering irons. No apologies, that's what works for me. And if something works for you differently, then happy days. Oh, by the way, if you wonder what the big box back there is, that's where the 3D printer is in. So I can close the door on it and shut it up because it's bloody noisy. Anyway, from myself, Matt, cheerios. Go on then, own up. Who spotted the complete screw up when I was chatting away to you? Did you spot it? Hands up if you did. If you did, let me know in the comments section. Matty was soldered up the wrong battery connector. He actually soldered up a female connector to his battery and not a male Now, before we go, one massive tip. If you are soldering up a battery, or you have the wits to solder up a battery, which I normally suggest you wouldn't do, I'm just swapping the connectors over mine, you'll notice that I've just got a bit of insulation tape which I've wrapped around the positive connector. And by the way, I always do positives first, and then connect up the negative, is to stop me shorting, or you shorting the two connectors together. Just wrap a bit of insulation tape, or maybe even put some heat shrink on them, over the terminal connector first, so that you're not going to get in there with a soldering iron and then get magic pixies appear in your face. So that's my little tip for you. Time for me to go. If you spotted that, well done. If you didn't, there was me chatting away to you, making a complete balls up by trying to solder on the wrong connector. Anyway, job done here. Let's go and pull the lead off, stick up our lead onto the top, and click, 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 he says. Once that goes on nicely, I'm going to cheat, shock horror, I'm going to use a pair of pliers to pull that down. Go on, up you go. Click. There we go. Nice battery connector soldered up, and you can't see any of the nasty soldering underneath. But hey, it only cost me $8.99 and a couple of tips, so that classed as happy days. Cheerios! Yay!